about continued fighting along and beyond the line of contact, including in heavily populated civilian areas, and reports of additional resupplies of tanks and missile systems coming across the border from Russia in the past few days.
Although that is something the Kremlin deny, saying they play no direct role in the conflict. The Ukrainian military say several soldiers have died in just 24 hours, while rebels say a number of civilians have also been killed. A spokesman for the European monitors on the ground said the Minsk ceasefire is the only available roadmap. If so, it does not look an easy path to peace. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Well, let's get some more reaction and analysis now. We're going to speak to Sir Tony Brenton, who's a former UK ambassador to Russia. He joins us via webcam from Naples in Florida. Good evening to you, Sir Tony.
Good evening.
What chances do you think this ceasefire has?
Well, it was always going to be a fragile deal, and it's a shame that the fighting has continued at the intensity that it has. But I think there's quite a lot of political commitment on both sides to making the deal work, so I wouldn't write it off just yet.
The problem is that so far that agreement's only been made with a bunch of leaders sat around a table, not necessarily the rebels on the ground, or certainly their leaders. That message, that instruction for a ceasefire has got to get through and be implemented, though.
Well, that's absolutely right. And it is one of the great difficulties is that neither side has complete control of what's going on the ground. The dissidents aren't entirely happy with the agreement because it doesn't give them the independence they were demanding. And there are right-wing militias on the Ukrainian side who are equally unhappy with the deal because it gives a lot of autonomy to East Ukraine. So there are a lot of ill intentions out there, if I can put it that way. And it will be down to the Russians on the one hand and the Ukrainian government on the other to try and enforce their will with the factions on the ground.
What is in it for President Putin to push this ceasefire to work?
Well, the deal for him, I mean, he's nailed his colours very firmly to the mast of getting a decent autonomy deal for eastern Ukraine. And the Minsk agreement points in that direction. So he has quite strong incentives to make it work, in addition to the fact that he's very uncomfortable where he is. He doesn't like the Western sanctions. He doesn't like the international isolation. He would very much like to get the war over with and get back to something more approaching normal business. On the Ukrainian side, they have real economic problems. The war is making those problems worse, and dealing with the war would then put them on a route to sorting out their internal problems and the route to prosperity. So both sides have very strong interests in making the agreement work.
What happens if it doesn't?
If it doesn't, then the outlook is pretty bleak. Where we were a week ago, before the Minsk deal, it looked as if we were moving towards an intensification of the war. The Americans were thinking about supplying weapons to the Ukrainian side, in which case the West is inevitably even more involved. And you're approaching something which looks very like a proxy war between Russia and the West, which is very bad news for everybody, of course.
Sir Tony Brenton, many thanks for your time this evening. Two Al Jazeera journalists who were released after more than a year in jail have returned home. Mohammed Fahmy and Bayer Mohammed